Session for Hackers Interrupted by Alex Holden. If most of you are not familiar with Alex Holden, he's the CISO of Hold Security. Can you guys hear me? Oh, yeah. All right. Thank you, guys. If you guys are not familiar with Alex Holden, he is credited with the discovery of many high-profile breaches, including the Adobe Systems initial vendor breach that led to the discovery of the JP Morgan Chase breach, the independent discovery of the Target breach, and the Equifax Argentina breach. Alex is considered one of the leading security experts, and he regularly voices his professional opinion in the mainstream media. So without further ado, give a warm applause for Alex.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's very warm. I live in Milwaukee, so it's about 20 degrees there right now with a bit of difference. But let me give you a little bit more background about myself, why I speak with a funny language and stuff like that. The accent is actually Russian, but I'm not from Russia. Never been to Russia. I was born in former Soviet Union, left when it was still big, happy family. Never been back. Accent stuck around, and my work in security got nothing to do with my accent. So when you go home and tell, hey, this Russian guy told me a whole bunch of scary things, keep in mind that the scary things that I talk about is from being a security professional rather than a hacker. Never been a hacker, but spent my entire professional career in IT, fighting for security. Initially spent 10 years building security infrastructures in a major brokerage firm. After that, did a lot of vulnerability research. I have about 2,100 different software vulnerabilities discovered in commercial products. After that, after financial industry took a downturn, went into private consulting firm, and what I keep hearing from the clients that had experienced breach, not only questions about what was taken, but the questions who did it and why. In my 10 years as a CISO in a major company, I hadn't thought a minute about the enemy. I assumed that these are just bad guys doing a whole bunch of bad things, and didn't try to put much of understanding of who these bad guys are. But then as soon as I start trying to figure out who the hackers are, my entire perspective on security had changed. We still do all the good things: pen testing, vulnerability assessments, infrastructure improvements, and in worst case scenario, incident response. But the most interesting thing that I found, instead of trying to only decipher zeros and ones, the easiest way to stop a threat, the easiest way to actually understand what's going on, is compromise a hacker himself or herself. We see a lot of gains of in technology, but still encryption and additional analysis makes it extremely difficult for us to figure out the initial attacks and what had exactly occurred inside the breach. To give you one fun example that I observed about 3 years ago, was a hacker coming into a chat room in the forum, Russian chat room, and he kept asking stupid questions. He gained access via RDP to a computer system that he had no idea what it's for, and then he asked the fellow hackers to help him to see what it's about. He got really lucky in the way that he got into a SQL server of one of the major commercial enterprises at the time. And when he got into that SQL server, for some reason, inside the SQL Server, the credit card numbers, about 2 to 3 million of them, were unencrypted. So the helpful hacker community in real time guided him on doing commands, and he kept posting the screenshots of what he's seeing. He couldn't type straight, so he had to ask for help, just because he cannot reproduce a command. But at the end of the day, he actually managed to get a SQL dump from the database on the file system. And when he was ready to transfer it, the last comment of him in the forum was something along the lines, "Hey, I only have half a gig left on my flash drive. This is 2.5 gigabyte dump file. I'm not going to transfer it. I don't have enough space, so I'm going to just close connection, go to the next target." So that's funny. He did all this damage, all the stuff that he did, and he never even profited, even though the gains were just one transfer away. Well, look at it from the perspective of defenders. If we didn't see that conversation, and just somebody in the company came in, they would see a lot of evidence of somebody tampering with the server. He was not exactly stealthy. But at the end of the day, they would find the dump of their data. They would find evidence of trespass, and they would have to declare a total loss. PCI requires to be able to quantify a loss. If you can't quantify it, then you have to declare a total loss. We were able to prove not only on information from this forum, but also on the NetFlow information that the data was never transferred. And the only data that he actually got off this, ready to be transferred was that SQL database. So that's simple. That's easy. But you have to understand the places where hackers dwell on the dark web. So, quickly to look at we have lots of protection. We got the technology layer, with, these and many other, defenses. You have, definitely a layer of defense in, us, security professionals, but also, you got, C-level executives, you got, legal, you got everybody trying to, help us with defenses. And when everything, fails, you got compliance that tells us in, no uncertain terms that we need to follow at least the basic standards, or bad things would happen. But with all of this in place, how does it stop the hackers? Who are the hackers? Many sites I see out there say secured by one company or the other, protected by this security brand. It's can be PCI compliant, HIPAA high-tech compliant, or anything like that. But hackers don't read our disclaimers. I never seen a hacker come into a site and say, "Hey, they're PCI compliant. I'm going to go to a different website." Just never happened. The funny thing is that most hackers don't even know how to read in English. The way I see the hackers are just relatively normal-looking guys who, for one way reason or another, went on a line of crime. And you see a lot of hackers coming from Russia. You see a lot of them coming from China, other countries, and there is a good reason for it. Most hackers like to enjoy non-extradition. So if U.S. does not have any extradition treaties with Russia or China, for example, they would not have ability to actually extract the hackers. Okay. So from the general perspective, we see hackers live in the poor countries where their initial gains actually make quite a bit more of effect than in ours. Yes, there are hackers in the United States, there are hackers among us, but the vast majority of attacks and the vast majority of this unpunished streaks of cybercrime is exactly coming from these countries. When there was an initial conflict between Russia and Ukraine, a lot of my colleagues colleagues were panicked, and they were completely panicked, seeing that the next war was going to be in cyberspace between Russia and Ukraine. My answer was simply no. If you look at why Ukraine is trying to sever its ties with Russia, why it's going through this great lengths of actually get away from Russia and join European Union, the hackers actually understood that one of the first waves of changes when Ukraine joins European Union would be extradition. And among was Ukrainian businessmen who would rush into Europe as soon as Ukraine joins the European Union, the meeting wave coming from the other side would be Europol agents with arrest warrants for Ukrainian hackers. So there would be no conflict between Russia and Ukraine in cyberspace. If anything, the Ukrainian hackers would be opening doors, and vast majority of majority of Ukrainian hackers had fled Ukraine in the past several years because they are afraid of changes and they are afraid of extradition. So, what are the threats? What we are afraid of that hackers would do? Well, we are afraid of them actually creating defamation and reputation loss. When we discovered the target breach back in 2013, it was a large breach by volume at the time. But I can tell you that from the numbers that I've heard, the only direct damages to credit card holders, those that credit cards were actually abused by the hackers and used for malicious purposes, was about $1.2 million. Yes, that's a lot. But to date, the effect to target after the breach is about $2.2 billion. So 1.2 million versus 2.2 billion. Look at Equifax. They had their data stolen. No data had actually surfaced on the dark web. No reports of the data abuse. Yet the company is sustaining billions of dollars of damage. Definitely reputation loss. We try to protect our secrets. We try to protect our data. And we also in the war of availability for our systems. So that's our defense side. What hackers do, how they function, well, you got your normal for-profit hacker, the guy who tries to make money by stealing somebody else's data or financial information. You got hacktivists, people who hack for some social, political reason. A lot of hacktivists don't care about financial gains, they care about making a statement. You got probably the most malevolent group of people are revenge hackers. Whether they don't like something for whatever reason, they're not trying to make a statement, they try to take something down. The denial of service hackers, the hackers who were behind last year's WannaCry and NotPetya viruses. So you see a lot of revenge hacking where there is main purpose to hurt. And there are state-sponsored hackers. I'm not going to spend much time talking about them because they're very general group of people who we don't know how to define. There are lots of ways for us to really identify the hackers and if they're state-sponsored or not. To give you an example, Chinese state-sponsored hackers have number one prerogative: never attack any target from Chinese soil. So if your system's registering attacks from Chinese IP addresses, you know one thing for sure: it's not Chinese government. Russian hackers working for the government, they actually try to emulate the attacks to make it look like somebody else did it. So from day one, they pegging somebody else to take a fall for it. They are emulating somebody else and creating a lot of disruption. You also can pick up a lot of patterns. Several years ago, there were smoke clouds over Beijing, and interestingly enough, several prominent Russian hackers did not come to forums during these days. Well, more investigation of these hackers actually turned out that they are coming from Chinese soil. They actually physically located in Beijing, and they couldn't come to work at their respective government offices. How do you become a hacker? Well, you go to school. You guys doing a good thing was you are Saturday actually learning about security, learning about defensive techniques. Hackers pay significant amount of money to actually go to school and try to learn about doing bad things. And they don't have these typical classrooms where a professor would have different learning material. Professors actually commit crimes in front of their students, showing how it's done. Their labs are our systems. So they actually do education, and some educational sessions cost up to $1,100 per day. So that's pretty darn expensive education. Yet most of places that offer this type of education also guarantee a job after you graduate. That's a difference. But from our perspective, we see that this army of new students work for professors who don't have to commit any crimes besides actually teaching the students on live examples on how to steal money, how to monetize things, and then they have an army of hackers working for them and splitting their profits back and forth. How do hackers perceive us? Test 88, which I'm going to talk about later, an infamous hacker who revealed data from breaches like LinkedIn, MySpace, Yahoo, Dropbox, and many others, actually see Americans as garbage. Another hacker called Aqua from infamous gang Jabbazurs actually told me at one point that he sees himself as a warrior of jihad, and jihad is against the West for him. Actually located in Russia, he saw that said that he would never hurt fellow Slavs, but he would actually direct his attacks against Western Europe, against UK, against the United States and Australia, because that's his calling in life. As we get a lot of propaganda blasted at us for various reasons, the hackers get propaganda blasted at them as well. So in some cases, they think that we all drive Rolls Royces and live in $1 million houses, and stealing money from us is their calling. We won't even see the damage from the money they steal. They're obviously wrong, but they're extremely well convinced what they're doing is right. So let me tell you a little bit about the breaches, people behind the breaches. How easy would it be to stop the target breach? Well, very simple. This young man in the picture is named Rinat Shabayev. He was born in Russia, lived in Russia, became a programmer, was studying in school, and he decided to become a hacker. The reason why he tried becoming a hacker, well, his explanation, he was trying to meet girls. Not the easiest way there, but he actually started a service of breaking into social media and email accounts of significant others of the ladies, and that's how he marketed his services. The ladies were very nice to him as long as he was trying to help them, and as soon as he succeeded, they basically forgot that he existed. So that didn't work. Then he tried to go and try to find a job. He was actually looking on freelancer.ru, which is a Russian freelance website, and he was offering his services for $12 an hour, our equivalent. So he couldn't find a job. And now we know that he was a rather brilliant developer. When he wrote the software for the target malware named Kartocha, he was actually spending too much time on refining the software. He was spending a lot of time making sure that the software is bug-free, that never errors out, kills off nicely, and everything else. So he actually spent extra months on this development effort. That was his calling. His supervisor sympathizers in Russian underground gang, they were actually angry at him because he was wasting their time and stopping them from actually getting into their targets. So from that perspective, he was actually trying to do what he does, program things, write code. Yet, what it turned out, his work was manipulated by really bad guys, and we got the malware that saw up to 40 million credit cards in the target breach. Let's take a different guy from the same gang. His name is Userus, real name Alexander something. But he apparently loves Miami Beach, and from his social media profiles, he was very active. He loved coming to the United States. He loved figuring out how he can connect the hackers with various schemes. And the target was not his only scheme. He actually was trying to install skimmers in a couple places and stuff like that. We met this hacker through another hacker, and we start talking to our contact, and he inferred that this particular guy did sell access to the botnet that had this HVAC company credentials that end up to be a downfall of the target security system. So he was connected in several ways. He was participating, but then he disappears. And his friend asked us if we seen users around. No, obviously we didn't. But being a whole bunch of caring guys, we did ask a couple of weeks later, hey, did he show up? And in response, we get this slightly redacted screenshot. Apparently, this young man was crossing a border around El Paso and got stopped by ICE agents. So but at the time when the screenshot was sent to us, he was in ICE custody. It was extremely funny story because we realized that he is, had been arrested by U.S. law enforcement. So to deliver him to the folks who were doing the target investigation was a piece of cake. Imagine a hacker who already does not have any legal rights. His possessions were already taken by U.S. government, so there is no warrants, nothing is needed. The only issue, he was being extradited, basically kicked out from the country in the next 2 days. So as I know, and the Secret Service does not talk back much, but they had to scramble quite a bit to get everything set up to stop extradition and actually try to interrogate this young man in relations to the target breach. We see a lot of these things from the social side. And the reason why we are interested in the social side is that understanding the crime cycle, understanding how the hackers work, and eventually stop the hackers. Some of the hackers are very secretive. They commit a lot of crimes, but you can actually infiltrate their groups. You can figure out what they're doing, and you can stop them cold. To give you an example, to change the hackers' chain of supply, we had one of our clients who was continuously exploited by a brute forcer coming from a specific hacker group. And this brute forcer gets better, gets more features, and at the end of the day steals hundreds of thousands of accounts in the hands of other fellow hackers. So in order to stop that whole group, we decided not to buy this brute forcer, but become a part of the development cycle. We volunteered ourselves to be a beta tester for the product. And we found bugs. We actually spent a lot of time testing the software, make sure that we find as many bugs as possible. Our client greatly helped and made the hackers' development cycle very long, very tedious. In fact, they spent extra months developing this software where we were beta testing, and day one of the software going in on sale to the fellow hackers who would actually be abusing it. Well, the software didn't work because our client disabled it, the way that the hackers were exploiting it. So we were not happy. We came back to the hackers, said, what the heck? We tested this, it's ready for exploiting, but now day one doesn't work. They went for another month and a half, trying to redevelop software through another backdoor. And they spent a lot of time and their own money making the software fully functional. We also asked for a couple more features. For example, instead of XML output, we wanted the HTML. So they spent more time. They spent more efforts on this. At the end of the day, when on day one of software going back to black market, it stopped working again. We told them that we don't want to work with them anymore, and they told us good, because they're no longer developing software against this particular company, because it's not feasible. We changed the cost of developing this malware, and they, to date, it's been over a year, never went back writing a single code of for brute forcer that would be abusing our client. This is really discouraging the cybercrime from hackers. Not only stopping a single piece of software, not only blocking a single IP address, but that really changes the way the hackers perceive us. I want to talk a little bit about ransomware. We all had to deal with it one way or the other. Ransomware is bad. But if you actually analyze this hackers' psychology behind it, look at how they communicate with their paying customers or the victims, you would see that the hackers actually go through great care trying to improve their reputation. The whole idea of ransomware is when you pay, you get your data back. If you pay and you don't get your data back, or if you pay, your data still gets abused, you're going to create bad reputation for the hackers, so nobody else would pay for the ransom. The idea for them is to make their software, the ransom scheme, as accessible as possible once you pay. If you don't pay, well, you don't get your data back, they don't care. But if you pay, we've seen hackers change how they talk to you. They say please, they say thank you. They actually offer tech support to a degree of actually creating a VNC session to your computer so they can actually help you decrypt the data. They care about their reputation, and they fiercely protect it, because they know that if the ransomware has bad reputation, they won't get paid. We don't always think about this, but always try to exploit the hackers in a way that you can actually make a good prediction if paying makes sense in this situation or not. Well, we have a rather famous situation about a year and a half ago in November of 2016 when San Francisco's municipal light rail system got taken over by a ransomware attack. The practical result, poor citizens of San Francisco got to ride the light rail system for free for 3 days. But on the side of what's playing out in the media, well, they assumed that this guy did it. The hackers were using Russian email addresses, Russian phone numbers. They definitely made enough mistakes in their writing to show that they're not from around the United States. But they also talked to the media. They were demanding about 100 bitcoins, which is only $70,000 right at the time. Right now it's a bit more. But everybody in the media was screaming that Russians attacking the critical infrastructure of the United States. But investigation shows differently. When we investigated this particular situation, we saw a difference on language preferences and access techniques. We were able to find quite a bit about the hackers and their techniques. We actually got into one of the servers that they were trying to use to attack the internet. The way we got in, not by hacking, but we asked politely, and once we figured out which was their service provider, we went back and said, hey, we had tech support for these guys. They said if it's okay to take a look. They asked these guys, is it okay? They said, oh yeah, if they're tech support, they have to get in. So, with a bit of impersonation, but once we got into the system, we found a completely different picture. We found the server that was facilitating attacks had 370 IP addresses, unique IP addresses that connected to it. And the vast majority of them were coming from Iran. In fact, we were able to actually map out IP locations to figure out in which coffee houses in Tehran the hackers were congregating on which day. The hackers also exchanged notes on that server. They were using Farsi language, which is obviously a language of Iranians, to make notes of their victims. It was San Francisco Muni was not their only victim. They actually breached hundreds of other different targets. Yet San Francisco's municipal system was the biggest target, and that's why they were interested. Why did they pick that target? Well, it was too easy. They were actually doing scans of the full internet, and we noticed that when they were scanning the 75.0.0/11 network, the San Francisco's municipal road system had only one issue. The IP address was too low, and it got on the hackers' radar right away. So in this particular situation, the hackers didn't know what they found. They talked among themselves when we translated the messages. They never mentioned that they knew what systems they exploited. They only knew that it had a lot of nodes. They actually had to hire a third party to help them with Mimikatz to get everything set up. But it was not a directed attack. They were actually not interested in many of the targets besides getting paid. So, you have one story in the media, the sky's falling, Russia's attacking us, but at the same time, you have Iranian hackers trying to pretend to be Russians, just scanning the internet and finding targets of opportunity. Very important to know how to deal with this, and very important to make critical decisions on how to remediate a disaster. I mentioned TESA-88. This is one of the most interesting cases where a hacker actually came out from virtually nowhere, used a female nickname, even though he is a guy, and he terrorized our not only security community but Vault community by revealing breaches like LinkedIn, MySpace, Tumblr, and many others. In fact, when he posted Twitter data, Twitter stock went down for the next 2 days, even though the data was fake. The hacker made a lot of money, and he was talking to the media without much fear of reprisal. So who's TESA-88? We started our surveillance. We figured out the women that he was dating. We figured out him and his family. Also surveilled his cat, Vasily. Right now, as the investigation is still ongoing, I decided to cover the faces, especially the cats, with our logo, but definitely trying to figure out who this guy is. So who is he really? This is a picture of him wearing actually Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles outfit. this is something that he provided to us, which is equivalent of a Russian police shield, or he likes to pose for these type of pictures in anonymous mask. He is really a man of many faces and many lies. To give you an idea how he became a criminal, looking at his resume from about 10 years ago, when he was only 19 years old, he actually claimed to have no experience with anything, and he was looking for a job as a salesperson. Looking for a job as a salesperson, he said that he's good with people, he's good with convincing people, but he does not have any relevant experience. In fact, most of his crimes that he committed were not done out of technology, but out of brokering connections between other really bad hackers. And when he began his career, he was actually selling drugs. He was selling this drug called Hiroshima. I know nothing about drugs. I took some data from Wikipedia. But he was selling these drugs, and these are locations in Kursk, which is southern regions of Russia, and Kherson, which is adjacent region of Ukraine. So we were actually able to track his crime streak, as he was just basic drug runner. At the same time, he was doing bad things on eBay, so he gets a jail sentence. On his social media, he posts in Russian this roughly translated poetry. He was full of remorse going to prison, scared for his life. He didn't know what would be happening to him next. Yet, in prison, he meets very bad people, serving time for much more worse crimes than defrauding eBay. He makes connections with people who connect him with the cybercrime rings of cyber criminals who actually have possession of most critical data stolen from many companies back in 2013, 2014. He starts his crime streak selling LinkedIn on the dark web while still in prison. And as he gets out of prison, he continues selling the data in bulk. In July of 2016, he actually obtains a copy of sample of Yahoo stolen data from 2013. He actually shows up this sample of the data months before it's actually goes on sale on the dark web. And when we showed it to somebody who should know the data structure in Yahoo, who was no longer with Yahoo, there was a long pause and said, hey, these guys are screwed. But from the perspective of him having a small sample of data of 5,000 records, and being promised the rest of the data, he decides to go and put this data on sale as fake data. In July, on the now defunct site, The Real Deal, he puts out this yahoo.full.sql.rar file. It's 8 gigabytes in size, accompanied by a sample of the data. The sample looks real. The sample is real. Unfortunately, the data inside of this RAR file, all 8 gigabytes of data, is fake. It's coming from different breaches. It's coming from Badu, Qubit.com, Dropbox, LinkedIn, and many other places. There is a lot of data there, but there is no Yahoo data. He basically causes this worldwide panic that resulted in Yahoo actually looking deeper into their infrastructure and discovering the first and then the second breach that they had, just because he had a small sample that somebody showed to him at one point. So, you can imagine that the logic of this person and the amount of menace that he did is unimaginable. It's interesting that, we talk about the hackers who actually breached LinkedIn, breached other places, and people like this who popularize this data. They actually obtain the data, they put it on sale for really minuscule amount of money. Test 88 right now is broke, even though at one point he had a Bitcoin wallet with more than 500 Bitcoins. At the time it was closer to probably $200,000. Right now it's millions of dollars. But he spent most of it on drugs. He spent a lot of it on other bad habits. But at the end of the day, he ended up with nothing. From our perspective, looking at how hackers think, how they work, is completely different. A lot of us think about or do fantasy sports, fantasy football, and I look at some of my friends and colleagues, and I look how much time they spend picking their lineups, thinking about what they're going to be going against. It's actually interesting amount of time in their life they're spending on this. But we as security professionals, we never really look at the other side. We never look at the hackers. We never look at what who we trying to defend against. Because nowadays we're building a lot of defenses against the threats that simply don't exist. A lot of hackers actually look at our defenses laughably. And unfortunately, the hackers are not always going for a specific target. In a lot of cases, in most cases, hackers are looking for the lowest hanging fruit. So from our perspective, it's important that we actually defend against the most common threats, the most common exploits, the tools that hackers readily have. I also, we do a lot of auditing, and when our clients ask us, what's, once they're being audited, as I secured, and I usually say, yes, you are secure from the auditor who did the audit, and their tools. That you're not secure from the hackers. The difference is that hackers think outside the box. The hackers don't have all these cool tools that auditors have. And in many cases, they take shortcuts. Hackers are lazy. Instead of actually trying to breach your infrastructure, they go on the dark web and buy credentials to your website that's been stolen from your users, your customers, maybe years ago, but still valid. That's their way to compromise the system. It's not always trying to find a 0-day or some kind of vulnerability. That's too difficult for them. These are still top 4 vulnerabilities that hackers exploit. Reused credentials, stolen credentials. Hackers get them in bulk. 3 days ago, we found another database cache of 154 gigabytes of somebody's collection of stolen credentials. This does not impress us at all. There are billions of credentials floating out there, and unfortunately hackers have access to them. It's no longer the amount of credentials that we care about, but where the credentials came from and how potent they are. 0-day vulnerabilities running amok, and from our perspective, the hackers trading a lot of those vulnerabilities for tens of thousands of dollars a piece. Viruses, well, we see a lot of exportation, a lot of propagation techniques. The reason why we haven't seen much of outcome from Meltdown and Spectre vulnerabilities is because hackers were not able to weaponize it fast enough, and a lot of good systems that they would consider to be targets patch nowadays. And then lastly, misconfigurations. Everybody makes oopses. Unfortunately, hackers like to exploit it. One of the most difficult jobs for us as defenders is to do our job 100% right all the time. Hackers need to find one thing that we forgot. And that's what usually happens with a lot of systems. So at the end, I see hackers every day. I know how they're functioning, and they feel that they're winning. At the same time, we see a huge turnover in the hacker population. Our defense is making a lot of hacker skills obsolete, and they leave the business. This idea of hacker university is actually proliferating amount of hackers, but most of them trigger alarms and they get caught. So a lot of tools that they have get disclosed to us quite quickly. The data that they steal, I usually call hackers kleptomaniacs. They take all the data they can, and then they put it out on the dark web, and it sits there until somebody needs it. So they may not monetize it today, but within next week, months, and sometimes years, they will get better. They will get actually this data sold. And at the end of the day, the defense is easy. As I said, try to defend against the most common issues, and try to understand your enemy, because your enemy going to be actually targeting very specific components, and you can use it to detect additional ways that they try to get in. This is all I had today. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Anybody got questions? Sure.
I've heard a couple of reports that certain countries will leverage hackers to get caught in prison. They'll say, well, if you work for us, we'll get you out of your prison sentence. Is that something you've seen in the field?
Absolutely. The law enforcement actually looks for hackers, and they not only take in their tools, they actually take over their systems. They keep operating them, and black market systems that were taken over, like Hansa and Alphabet, actually function for weeks under control of law enforcement. So that's a good example of law enforcement actually leveraging stolen data.
Examples of social engineering, pretending to be somebody to gain access to.
Yes, social engineering probably is the easiest way the hackers get in, because they create systems that would be able to emulate you, but at the same time, social engineering, it's easy. We do social engineering because it's the easiest way to get to the hackers without any tools. It works the other way much, much better.
You mentioned you get a lot of cases where hackers are going towards the lower end. Do you also see cases where they're very targeted towards a specific organization